Well, so we told you we'll be taking you to the Omanya Hall. The Labadi Beach Hotel is where Kojo we're having the Stanbic Bank graphic business breakfast meeting.
That's
and
right.
it's the first. They have 4 quarters of meetings, and this is the first for
2020. Yep. And our very own Mamabi is there, ready to have the big conversations with the big names, starting with the editor of Graphic Business, Theophilus Yati. Right. Hello, Mamavi. If you can hear me. Yeah, we understand you have Theophilus Yati with you, and things are gearing up for the breakfast meeting.
Exactly. Right now, what's happening is, well, the guests here are having a 5-star breakfast. That's something that you would love, I know. But the graphic business news editor is here with me, Mr. Theophilus Yati. He will explain what's going to be happening here this morning. This is the first for the year 2020.
Yes, this is the first for the year 2020. And we want to start with discussing the economy. Specifically, we are going to discuss our revenue and expenditure issues. So the topic basically is breathing new lease of life into our economy, fixing the revenue and the expenditure conundrum. We chose this topic because we think that over the years, the challenge this country has been because of the structure of our economy. So we don't generate much, but we spend a lot of money. So as a result, every time we have to borrow to take care of basic things. So, and because of that, the economy has not been growing the way it should. And we think that's about time we have a conversation which is very apolitical, very dispassionate, and look at how we can go around this problem so that the economy can get some new life. Yeah, that's why we are here this morning.
Great. Explain the people gathered here this morning.
This morning we have policy makers, we have the academia, we have business people here, we have basically a cross-section of Ghanaians, because when it comes to the economy, it's not just the experts, but it affects every pocket. So everybody has a say in how how the economy should be run and how the country should be run.
Yeah.
So we basically threw our net very wide to make sure that at least we attract the best of brains to have this very important discussion.
Explain also the recommendations and the comments that would come. Where would it end up?
Okay, so what we intend to do is that we don't want this conversation to just end here so that it becomes a mere talk show, but we want to take it beyond here. So we'll put it in a report and ensure that the Ministry of Finance, the economic management team have copies so that we share with them some of the recommendations and the suggestions that came out of here, because else then it becomes mere talk show, and we don't want it like that.
Is it also a coincidence that we have the State of the Nation address coming up on Thursday?
When we were fixing the date, we didn't have that in mind, but it's a beautiful coincidence, if I must say. Yeah, so we would make sure that whatever we do, we expedite it, and we make sure that they get the feedback from here. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so we'll have some panelists.
Yes, we have.
Who are they?
We have the IMF resident rep here, Dr. Albert Tunamama. He will speak here. We have Mr. Kofi Bento, he's the Vice President in Mani Africa. Then we have Mr. Abeku Gyan-Quansah, who is a partner with PwC. So they are all here to speak. But apart from that, we have we have like Mr. Tekpe.
Yeah.
We have some MDs of banks who also share their views on the topic. So it's not just the speakers, but we will also extend it to the participants to also participate, and there will be questions and answers to sessions so that people can freely ask questions and also give suggestions and also get answers to some of their questions.
Okay. All right. So I see that the show is just about getting underway.
Yeah.
So we're going to wrap up. and link up with Nicholas, who is hosting the event today.
Thank you very much, Mama.
Okay, guys, so it's a wrap. We will come to you with exactly what's happening here at the Labadi Beach Hotel on Manyo Hall. It's the Stanbic, graphic Stanbic breakfast meeting, and JoyNews is proudly a partner.
They will abide by them, particularly this year being election year. This morning, our conversation is slightly related, also slightly different. We're talking about how to bridge the gap between expenditure and revenue. What's undermining our efforts to bridge the gap between revenue and expenditure? We'll be having very interesting conversations. We have a crack panel that is going to help us do the discussion. But before we get into the discussion, we will take an opening prayer from Mr. Ferron Atto. He is the Internal Audit Manager at Graphic. Shall we welcome him with a round of applause, please?
Shall we bow down our heads in prayer? Our Heavenly Father, we come this morning to give you glory and honor. We say we adore your holy name. We want to thank you for our lives. We thank you for the privilege of being present at this gathering. We invite your holy presence to take control over everything we do here. Our prayer is that at the end of the day, Lord, the purpose for this graphic business Stanbic Bank meeting will be achieved. We pray this and many other blessings in Jesus' name with thanksgiving. Amen.
Thank you, Ferron. Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to remind you that this program is going to be live on Joy 99.7 FM. Also going to be live on JoyNews TV. We'll be streaming live on myjoyonline.com. Also be streaming live on the Facebook page of Daily Graphic Ghana. We will now hear the opening remarks from the people who have brought us here. And to do that is the editor of Graphic Business, Mr. Theophilus Yate. Shall we welcome him with a round of applause, please? Mr. Yate? Okay, he's coming all the way from behind. I believe it's okay to give him a round of applause while he makes his way here. Thank you very much.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Stanbic Bank and Graphic Business and my company that pays me, Graphic Communications Group, I welcome you all to this very important function. It's important we meet today to discuss a very important topic like this because of the way our economy is and the way things are going. I believe that all of you would contribute and make this event memorable. Thank you very much.
I know many of us are having breakfast, but that doesn't mean we should shortchange him on the applause. Shall we give him another round of applause? We will hear from the MD of Stanbic Bank. We all know him, Mr. Al-Hassan Andani. He's very passionate about economic issues, about development issues, and this morning it's an honor to welcome him for his opening remarks. Shall we give him a round of applause, please?
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. And on behalf of Graphic Stanbic, I want to thank you for coming, and particularly to our very distinguished panel. The subject is a matter that between Graphic and ourselves, we think we have to bring the best brains to deal with it. So we have a country, I mean, we all know the importance of governments around the world. and governments and the country is developed through tax revenues and other revenues of state. I think for anybody following the economy of Ghana, and I see Mr. Seth Tekpe here, I always say that he's the best technician that I've known in the Ministry of Finance. You have consistently over the years a revenue number that is allocated in a very, very lopsided manner. And we don't seem to have, or we don't seem to take a break to understand how do we reverse it. So our view is, and if you look at the data, about 70% of the revenue that we collect in Ghana is allocated to maintaining the public service. That is just the recurrent salaries and services of public servants, who number roughly 600 to 650,000 out of a population now of 26 million people. 70% of our country's revenue is used to maintain that, and they're important. About 20–25%, I'm sure the technocrats will have the numbers. Again, it's used to service maturing loans and interest payments falling due within the fiscal year. So if we do the maths, we have just less than about 10–15% left to transform the country. We think this is not the way to go. If you look at comparator countries, they do between 35 to 40% of revenue maintaining their government recurrent expenditure. But we seem to be growing, aligning, putting more of our revenue just looking at wages and salaries of less than 1 million people out of the 26 million of Ghana. And I stress their work is very important. But it's to answer the question, how do we reverse this trend? And that's why we have assembled these very distinguished personalities to start a national discourse, I hope, that we can all apply our minds to in order to see a reversal of that unfavorable trend. So on this note, I want to say once again, on behalf of my friends in graphic, thank you very much for coming, and let's give our audience the challenge that they need so that they can tell us the truth, nothing but the truth. Thank you very much.
Another round of applause for Mr. Al-Hassan Andani, please. I'm told we have to also take the opening remarks, and it's only appropriate that we do so from the MD of Graphic. Shall we welcome Mr. Ato Afo with a round of applause, please?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The board of Graphic Communications Group Limited, my partner and sponsor, the Managing Director of Stanbic Bank, Mr. Ndani, members of the Diplomatic Corps, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, and our expert panel of speakers, we welcome you to this edition of the Stanbic Breakfast Meeting powered by the Graphic Business. As Mr. Ndani has noted, he's an expert in economics and banking. I am not, so I won't go into that territory. There are things that we are here to look at, and I believe that graphic business is giving us, over the time, the clarity, purpose, and focus to enable us assemble such a delegation to make this possible. Our plea and our request is simple. Let us use this opportunity constructively to pick out and tease out practical ideas, propositions, and solutions that we can implement to make this country that we all love move forward. There's too much noise. There's too much in distraction that negates the purpose of what it is that we try to do every day as a people. This forum gives us the opportunity to filter out the noise using the experts that we have at our disposal to make that possible. Stanbic Bank has partnered us with purpose, and they've been consistent in this endeavor. And our host, Labadi Beach Hotel, makes it possible for us to sit comfortably to do this. The outcome, as I said, is simple. It's a quality audience, a distinguished panel of speakers, and our outcome would be that we get something out of here that we can go out to advise experts like Mr. Setekpe, who is here, and the others who are doing the job currently to make this country move forward. The topic, as has been pitched, is interesting, breathing a new lease of life into the economy. And they have another sub-line onto it, fixing the revenue expenditure conundrum, a very big English word indeed. What does it mean? The experts will tell us. And I believe that we are looking forward to an amazing conversation which will leave us enlightened to enable us go forward and build a nation that we're all proud of. This is an election year, and as the experts and technocrats have noted, there's always some degree of over-expenditure, which we've been promised wouldn't happen. And I hope that when we take a message forth from here, those who are in charge of our purse would know that we're also interested in what it is that the outcomes would be post the end of this fiscal. On that note, I say thank you very much for coming, and I welcome you to a breakfast meeting hosted by Stanbic Bank and powered by the graphic business for the first time in this quarter, and we look forward to other opportunities in the course of the year to enable us build a better Ghana that we're all proud of. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Atuafo. Shall we give him another round of applause? Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to remind you that you could join this conversation right here using the hashtag #GraphicStanbic series. Also remind you that this program is live on Joy 99.7 FM. My name is Nick Opoku. We are also live on JoyNews television. We're also streaming live on myjoyonline.com. We'd like to acknowledge a few of our sponsors. This program is supported by Stanbic Bank, supported by Labadi Beach Hotel, Protocol Services, supported by Prostline Event, and setup provided by GeoVision Services. Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who have taken time to go through the budget statement for 2020, you will notice that the projected revenue for the country is about 67.1 billion Ghana cedis. Expenditure is about 84.5 billion. So clearly there's a shortfall. How are we going to finance the shortfall? Are we going to get loans? Are we going to borrow? Indeed, if we are going to borrow, is it a viable way of financing our development? Are we even looking at the problem correctly? For example, if we're able to block the revenue leakages, then there might be no need to borrow. We'll be hearing from the partner at PwC, Mr. Abeku Gyan-Quansah. He's going to do a presentation on innovative ways of increasing revenue, just to put our conversation in context. So with a round of applause, shall we welcome Mr. Abeku Gyan-Quansah.
Hello. So good morning, everyone. And over the next few minutes, I would attempt, and of course, as one of those that gave an opening remark said, just lay the foundation for a constructive discussion that seeks to filter out the noise. All right. So when I got the invitation from Graphic Business and Stanbic Bank on this very big theme, breathing new lease of life into the economy, fixing the revenue expenditure conundrum. The truth of the matter is that my heart jumped. It jumped because when you talk about breathing life, for those of us who believe in the good book, the Bible, the first person to breathe life was God. The next encounter of my breathing life was Prophet Ezekiel. All right? So today, I would attempt to be an Ezekiel. But whether or not the bones would live would be the audience to make that happen. So over the next few minutes, what I would attempt to do hello? What I'll attempt to do is to break down my presentation into 3 main points. What a problem is, what is the solution framework that we are proposing, and then lastly, my role is simple, just to lay the foundation for us to discuss. So I'm going to share a few ideas and then also enable you to share your ideas. 2020 is a special year. So one of the first things I thought of doing was to take a step back, right back to 2000 to date, to see how we've performed in each of those election years. In 2000, we planned that we're going to have a budget deficit of 6.1%. We ended up doing about 8.5%. So the percentage change there was about 40%. Then in 2004, we planned 1.7%, we did 3.2%. We ended up close to 90% overrun on our budget deficit. In 2008, the interesting thing is that we did close to 2 times what we planned in excess. So we wanted to do about 4. We ended up doing close to 12% budget deficit in 2008. Fast forward 2012, we ended up doing an excess of about 80%. 2016, we ended up doing about 64%. And of course, those arguments will come back whether you're talking about cash or committal basis, but I'm not going to go into those conversations. The takeaway point was that in each of those years, we ended up going above what we planned by about 50% to almost 200%. 2020, we are planning to do 4.7. The question is, what would we do at the end of the year? What makes 2020 an interesting year is that government's position is that now I have a Fiscal Responsibility Act. And of course, the finance minister was on Newsfile over the weekend, clearly saying that if he goes over that, his job potentially could be on the line. So now we have a Fiscal Responsibility Act, which ordinarily says that you should not go beyond 5% until there is a reason or there's an emergency for we to accept you going beyond that 5%. So the graph over there basically shows us what we've done in each of those election years. And an election year also confronts us this year. Now, our moderator for the day was clear. We are planning to spend about 86 billion, excluding amortization of our debt in 2020. We are going to raise revenues of about 67 billion. Now, if you invite a tax partner to talk about the revenue side of this topic, then of course expect that I'll be very biased towards taxes. And the reason is simple. Out of that revenue basket of about 67 billion, taxes is planned to be about 49.2 billion, or roughly about 73% of that collection for 2020. In other words, if we're not going to take anything out of today's conversation, just remember that GRA plans to raise about 50 billion for 2020. Truth of the matter is that the 50 billion would have to come from you and have to come from me. And we need to talk about innovative ways to ensure that at the end of the day, we are able to raise that sufficient revenue to be able to put up the kind of hospitals you and I deserve, the kind of roads you and I want to drive on, the kind of security you and I want. So having established the fact that I'm talking about the revenue side, and I'm going to be focusing on the tax bit, which contributes about 73% of what we attempt to raise, what is the solution framework that I would propose for 2020? Now, one of the things that you have seen from the graph is that year on year, we'll be running a budget deficit. But the natural question that comes up is that why are we unable to raise the kind of revenues that we seek to raise on an annual basis? Some observation, we are saying that if governments, if the people are assured that, one, we contribute and we will have our contributions protected, then we can always go back to ask for more. Because the natural question that you always have anyone ask is that, what has happened to all the contributions that I have done in the past? So that you may not see it a lot in the corporate world, but if you go to our markets and you ask them to contribute, what they're going to be telling you is that what we have contributed in the past, what and how has this benefited us? So before we share those innovative ways to raise revenue, the very first point we want to say is that until and unless the citizens are encouraged and motivated and reassured that the purse is being protected and protected well, we will still have challenges when it comes to revenue generation. The second point that we want to share as a framework is that last year or last 2 years, we were all in this country when a segment of our society said that they were only going to start paying taxes if they were educated. And I wish we could all jump onto that and also say that we have not been educated properly, so we're not going to pay taxes. So the second thing that we're going to share to government is help take away those excuses that have not been educated. Because if I've not been educated, and that will serve as an excuse, then everyone would want to raise the education as an excuse. The third bit is on systems. So the question is, how can I easily pay my taxes? Do I need to join the traffic to get to the tax office, and when I miss that deadline, I incur penalties and interest? If we want people to comply, and for us to raise the relevant taxes that we want in this country of ours, we need to ensure that the systems are adequately working. If I need a tax clearance certificate, can I just walk to the GRA? The GRA goes through its files, and then indeed confirm that I am worthy of that certificate, or would I be asked to bring copies of all the returns that I've filed over the years before the tax clearance certificate is issued? 4, the question is, if I can actually get away with my wrongs, there is a motivation to keep getting away and doing the wrong things. So to what extent have we enforced the tax laws in the past? And actually, people hold the view that when I walk to the tax authority to tell them that I am starting a new business, then I would, on that very first day, be given a lot of taxes to pay. Whilst if I don't go there, nobody chases you. To what extent are we going to address these issues around enforcement? The last bit is on trust. So do government itself trust the people to discharge their duties? And do we really trust government to really use the tax laws that they have actually passed fairly? So these are the questions, and this is the framework that we want to share with you as we get ready to get into the conversation around increasing our tax revenues. And indeed, for those of you who are monitoring, what I've essentially done is to spell the word reset. So if we are reassured, if we are educated, if the systems are right, if the laws are going to be enforced, and there is trust, then yes, you and I can begin talking about the tax revenues that we want to raise. My final agenda point would be on sharing some ideas. But before that, I wanted to recollect something that the president said in 2019 at the State of the Nation's address. He said, Revenue mobilization poses the biggest challenge in the managing of our economy, with tax exemption policies in particular being my headache. So this comment was made in the 2019 State of the Nation's address. 2 days from today, we'll have another State of the Nation's address. And what would be the biggest economic management challenge of the government? You and I can only guess at this stage. But then, indeed, one of the things that the president mentioned last year was that exemptions was a headache. So I'm going to touch on exemptions as I go forward. Also, the minister clearly said in the 2020 budget that there's going to be a number of reforms when it comes to the tax base. So I would also talk about those reforms as I seek to share some ideas on how we can generate revenue. Now, the ideas that we're going to share has been placed in these 6 categories. The first being implementation, and I will explain that. The second being on value-added tax. I'll come back to talk about that. The third being the informal sector, the sector you and I have struggled to touch in the past. The fourth being things on sustainable development goals. The fifth being time value of money, which I'll come back to explain. And the last being simplification. Now, there is nothing innovative about raising tax revenues if the policies that you have talked about, the laws that you have passed, cannot and have not been implemented. So the first one, which is an implementation, whenever the conversations around taxing the e-commerce comes up, I sometimes ask myself, why are we doing this to ourselves as a country? In 2013, we passed a VAT Act known as Act 870. And in that act, we specifically said that for some non-resident that provide e-commerce to persons in this country of ours called Ghana, we're going to charge some VAT. That law came into force on the 1st of January 2014. And if you take account with me, the whole of 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020. Even the good books tells us that on the 7th year, the deaths of people should be cancelled. If you have passed a law, and for 7 years, we have done virtually close to nothing in terms of publicly available information to touch that segment, then the question I ask myself is, did we really think through properly when passing those laws? Or is it because we had seen the global world or the global economy go a particular direction along what we call the BEPS project? We also wanted to do the same. The question is, if we have things in our law which we are not passing, you create a lot of doubt and uncertainties in the mind of people who have to do it. Now, the question that some of you may raise is that why are we not enforcing this? Now, in tax, the 2 main taxes that you may have is what we call income tax and VAT. Now, you may be liable to VAT, but not liable to income tax. The current laws and the current practice in this beautiful country of ours is that if I want to register for VAT, I need to go to the tax office and provide some information, including sketching where my office is located. And in addition to that, I need to submit certain documents, certificates of incorporation, and previously, commencement certificate. That non-resident, if they are going to sketch any place, will be beyond the seas, not in Ghana. That's the starting point. And the documents that they will provide are not documents issued by your registrar of companies or your registrar general's department. So therefore, when they go to the GRA, they actually cannot even register. So the question is, why should we pass a law for close to 7 years and we have taken absolutely, publicly, absolutely no effort in implementing that? Second point, we kept complaining as a country that there was a lot of VAT fraud. I can go and walk into some place and they'll ask you the question, do you want VAT or do you want VAT? And at the end of the day, what happens is that last year we even saw a case where a Chinese-led company, certain persons were arrested because of VAT fraud. So you walk in, you get your VAT invoice, but as they write, there are certain things, so it doesn't get onto the counter for in the manner in which it was written. They were arrested. Because of that, 2 years ago, we said we were going to introduce what is called a fiscal electronic device. And what that basically meant was that when you are issued VAT invoices using that device, by the close of the day, the GRA should have an indication of the sales that you have made on that day. So by the time an audit is carried out on you, GRA has a fair idea of the amount of VAT invoices that you have issued. This law was passed in 2018, and one of the good things about this particular law was that there was now a commencement date, which meant the GRA was going to tell us when the law would come into force. 1.5 years down the line, this law is still gathering dust and yet to be implemented. And one thing
with Stanbic Bank presents the Graphic Business Stanbic Bank Business Breakfast Meeting under the theme Breathing a New Lease of Life for Our Economy, Fixing the Revenue Income Conundrum. Date is 18th February 2020 and the venue is the Omani Hall, Labadi Beach Hotel. Time is 7 a.m. prompt. Speakers are Dr. Albert Tunamama, IMF Resident Representative, Mr. Kofi Bento, Vice President of
which is publicly available, suggested that they dealt with it from the top. We passed the law in 2013, once again, the VAT law, saying that ministries, agencies, government bodies, that does things that a private person should do and meet the VAT registration threshold. And for the sake of the audience here, in general, if your taxable supplies exceed 200,000 over a 12-month period, the laws of the land require you to walk to GRA if you are making a taxable supply and ask to be registered. The GRA could choose to register you or otherwise. What have we done? We have passed a law which says that if the MMDAs are doing things that private businesses are doing and they meet the VAT registration threshold, they should be charging VAT. 6-7 years down the line, I am yet to identify any MMDA that has complied with this provision of law. The question is, if we don't want it in our law, let's just remove it. The laws are for us, and we are not for the law. So the question is, if you have all these things in the law, the issue is, are you really keen on enforcing the laws as you have it? The last point I would like to raise on implementation is exemptions bill. And remember, I just said the president at the State of the Nation's address in 2019 clearly said that his main headache, one of the reasons why when Auntie Rebecca cooks local rice and he cannot eat it freely is because exemptions and things are giving him headache. We promised, and it was clearly stated in our Article 4 consultation in 2018 to the IMF, that we're going to submit that bill to Parliament for consideration in June 2018. We are in February 2020, and nothing has been done about it. And before that, I remember very well in March 2019, Parliament actually requested people to submit a memoranda on that bill. Submissions were done. The deadline for that memoranda was 5th April 2019. Let's count from 2019 till date. We have gone about 10 months, and publicly, nothing shows that anything is going to happen to those exemptions bill. So the first point I want to make here is that there is nothing innovative if you cannot implement the laws and the plans and the commitments that you make to do. The second innovative thing I want to talk about is on VAT. Truth of the matter, and I am happy with what the MD for Daily Graphics said, we need to have a constructive conversation. The truth is that our VAT system is no longer a proper VAT system. Over the years, we have disturbed how a VAT system must work. and created a VA system, which is a lot disturbing. Before the close of this session, I want to throw out a question. If I begin selling shawarma and I make 200,000 Ghana cedis or 250,000 Ghana cedis, when we close, please give me the answer on what the VAT rate on this shawarma should be. We should not create a system that creates a lot of doubt on simple transactions as this, because what you end up doing is that if the system is complicated, we all go for the line of least resistance, which may not be in line with what Parliament intended, and provided my friends at the Ministry of Finance are doing proper budgeting, they would give an expectation which we would never meet. So we've created a VAT system which denies persons inputs, which is actually anti-productive, and not even in line with the 2016 manifesto of the NPP government. For those of you who want to go and look up the manifesto, what the manifesto said was that we're going to introduce the VAT flat rate for small and micro businesses. To my mind, small and micro can be best defined in terms of revenue limits, not in terms of the chain that you are currently operating. So how it works now in Ghana is that you are required to charge 3% VAT if you are making a supply of tangible goods and you are either a wholesaler or a retailer. This is overly and unnecessarily complicated. Reason, if I decide to dispose of, let's say I provide professional services and I decide to dispose of my iPad, the question is, in terms of that disposal, am I a retailer or a wholesaler? Should I be charging 3%? Should I be charging 12.5%? So a system whereby even telling you what the standard VAT rate is, whether it is 12.5%, whether it's effectively 17.5%, whether it's effectively 18.125%, is unduly complicated. If the intent is to make our small and micro businesses pay flat rates, there is nothing better than defining it by virtue of threshold. If you don't meet this level, you operate the flat rates. If you exceed this level, you do otherwise. The next thing I want to talk about, which is an innovative way, is that we have introduced what is called a withholding VAT mechanism. At the time we introduced that VAT mechanism, the rate was 7%. Am I in agreement with that introduction? Yes, because of the nature of our economy. Our economy is so informal, and therefore withholding mechanism is the best way to raise revenue because you cannot expect everyone to go and file. So what do? We initially introduced that as 7.5%. Now, when we brought down the standard VAT rate to 12.5% from the effective rate of 17.5%, if we were consistently looking at our tax policies, there is no better way than to reduce that rate and get businesses to reinvest, build the tax base, and pay a lot more revenue. So second action point, second innovative way, let us apply and introduce a VAT system that works and that is not unduly complicated as we currently have. The third bit, which is a section we all want to shy away from, especially in a year like the 2020, is the informal sector. That sector, arguably, controls a large chunk of our GDP. But if you look at their contribution to tax, it breaks the heart. If you take a look at our recent budgets, if you compare the taxes that you and I pay as employees to what we generate from the informal sector, everyone in the formal sector contributes between 15 to 17 times of the equivalent person in the informal sector. So if our GDP base has a lot more contribution from the informal sector, but they are contributing 1/17 of what you and I contribute, then we'll continue to have issues around revenue mobilization. Now, when I talk about informal sector, I'm not talking about those who don't put on ties. If you also have things in your car boot which does not appear on your tax returns, you are part of that informal sector, which potentially causes those in the formal sector to carry a relatively much more portion of the weight. So what are the proposals along this informal sector? I was taking a look at the shadow that we have in our income tax regulations. And it would interest you to know that somebody can do a trotro business, and the whole year, the tax that the person pays will probably not exceed 60 Ghana cedis a year. Check on your pay slip and let me know when you last paid a tax of 60 Ghana cedis. But they use the road a lot more than you and I use the road. And an innovative suggestion that we have in this case is for us to introduce indexation. So what are we saying here? Every year, let us increase what we have in those shadows. So we can decide to say, as a country, it's been difficult taxing the informal sector. So on a year-by-year basis, we would increase the shadows that we have by about 10% to be able to get a lot more. Other suggestions that I would like to make, and of course I'll make them during the panel discussion, is that we need to develop measures that ensures that indeed we want to support the SGDs. So if you are into plastics or you are into anything that is not supporting the economy, we could potentially raise a lot more revenue by having a lot more taxes come on you. But the question once again will go back, what have we even done with the plastic fund that we set up a number of years ago? Another thing that we need to look at in terms of the innovative space is that a lot of government revenues are locked up in disputes. And I'm sure if I'm going to ask a question here, a lot of you will raise your hands that you are having a lot of disputes with the revenue. So in 2018, government clearly said that there was going to be an alternative dispute resolution mechanism to settle tax disputes. We are in 2020, 2 years down the line. That budget promise has yet to see the light of day. And then finally, the last point I will make is that our tax laws, especially for the informal sector, and remember, we need to take away those excuses, is unduly complicated. So for example, if I am in the informal sector and I employ somebody, you're asking me to go through the tax bands, which are 6 currently. The person will give you every excuse why they cannot go through. Can we reduce those tax bands to about 3 of them instead of the 6 that we currently have? So let me lay down this as the ideas for the conversation and then share a lot more when we go into the details. Thank you very much.
One more time, shall we hear it for Mr. Gyan-Quansah? Thank you for that very thought-provoking presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to remind you that we are live on Joy 99.7 FM. We're also live on the Facebook page of Daily Graphic Ghana. We are streaming live also on myjoyonline.com. We're also live on JoyNews TV. We'd also like to remind you that after registration, you get a text message which contains a link. You can access the program. And when you click on the link, there's also a questionnaire that we will kindly entreat you to fill. We'll move on to the next. And the topic for the next presentation is realigning expenditure priorities. We do know from the 2020 budget statement, as I indicated earlier, our total expenditure is about 84.5 billion cedis. Where are we spending the most? We are spending about 26.5 billion on compensation to employees, about 21.7 billion on interest payments alone, 15.6 billion cedis on grants to other government units, 9.3 billion cedis on capital expenditure, 8.3 billion cedis on goods and services, and then 3.1 billion on miscellaneous expenditure. Which of these expenditure can we vary because we do not have enough money? We do know that there's statutory expenditure, there's discretionary. Statutory we cannot do much about because that's according to law. Discretionary, can we vary any of these expenditure? Can we postpone because we don't have enough money? To do the presentation is a good friend of mine. He's the Vice President of Imani Ghana. We all know him. Shall we welcome Mr. Kofi Bentel?
Good morning. Nick wants me to give a lecture. This is not the crowd you give this lecture to. I think the problems are very well known. It's a pleasure to be here. The question is, what do we do about making more money and then spending it in a way that gives us best value? I like to approach it in a certain way. You see, the system we run today is not new. And sometimes when you lose your way or when things get difficult or convoluted, the first principle is simplify, simplify, simplify. And I think we need to start thinking that way. This democracy, this arrangement of sending people to run a certain government is something that has been contemplated for 4,000 years, from the days of Aristotle and co, Plato and co, talking about the philosopher kings and all the ways to organize government and all those things that they said, distilling down, through the French, the shenanigans of Napoleon trying to take over his monarchy and trying to organize government. Napoleon gave us the system for addresses, still about how do we organize society. Through the English kings and their absolute power, the establishment of parliament, the English Revolution leading to the Bill of Rights, and all those things, to today, and the history But the point I want to make there is this. Over 4,000 years of contemplation, there was a central issue that was distilled. And the central issue is that it is in everybody's interest that a certain set of people are picked by people, citizens, and then we pay them to run certain things on our behalf. And the central issue regarding that arrangement is that we must set limits for them. That fundamental principle is extremely crucial in this discussion. It is important. You cannot dig a gutter from your house to the sea. You cannot go and tap Akosombo Dam and string it to your house. You cannot make the road from your work to your hometown. So some group of people have to be picked, but the rules are important. And I'm saying when we get to this point where it gets convoluted and we are not sure what to do, we need to simplify, we need to go back to the first principles. The question is, have we lost our way? I think we have. We have because you have a system where politicians necessarily have to be there, but I am not too sure we pick them. I am not too sure we pick them. And I don't want to go too much into that whole arrangement, but the thing is this. There are two types of citizens, mainly. Individual citizens like me and you, and then corporate citizens. And we are supposed to be doing this work. We need to get to the point where we are quite sure we are exercising that fundamental right to pick the people we want. But more importantly, whoever we end up with, we need to make sure they rule at our pleasure. And we need to make sure the limits have been set. We need to make sure we are resourcing them and they are doing what we want. That's where I think we have lost it, which is why we need to deal with that issue. On the individual level, you'll get a chance to vote in 4 years. But I think that as a business community, we have run away for many reasons. And some of it includes the fact that you don't want your head above water so somebody cuts it. But I think corporate activism is a sine qua non for good governance. We need to get to the point where politicians have a healthy fear of an organized business community. It is extremely crucial, otherwise we won't fix this problem. Now, losing that ground is the reason why we can have 110 ministers and there's no problem with that. Or there's no compulsion, whether that will change or not. Losing that ground is the reason why we have 600,000 people in the civil and public services, and they take up over 50% of our revenue, no questions asked. So one of the first things I think we should start thinking about is how we will claw back on these very fundamental principles of making sure that we have a government that is there at our pleasure, and that's what we want, because we fund it. I hope in the discussion we'll get to that point. Now, it is dangerous when this slides beyond a certain point. Politicians are not bad people. Like I said, we need to have them. But they have an agenda. They have a political agenda. And they will prosecute on that political agenda unless we rise up and shape it up a bit. We have free SHS, which is generally very popular. It is a good thing. But it is one of the key expenditure items today, and more or less we are struggling with it. We should have that debate about whether those of you sitting here should have government paying your child's boarding fees. That debate has to be had, and it has to be had in a construct where there is a bit of compulsion on how that money is used. I have no doubt, based on what I do and all the people I talk to, that I haven't met anybody who is not prepared to pay extra for somebody else to get education. But whenever the issue is raised as to whether your child should receive government funding for staying in boarding school, it always just goes awry. So we need to have that debate if we are going to deal with these issues concerning revenue and expenditure. What we also need to figure out is how we're going to deal with the issue of tax. And people talk a lot about revenue, which is, raising more money. We need to raise more money, and again, we need to make sure that we are funding the people we put in government. And to that extent, there has been a whole movement in the last 10 years against aid, which is to say, if your government gets funding from other sources, then they won't listen to you. To that extent, therefore, we need to make sure we are the ones funding them. Now, it's been said already, so I won't belabor the point, but I think it's crucial. Our tax system is too convoluted, even for those of us in this room. So imagine what it means for all the people out there. I was going to go a bit into that, but I think it's been said. We need to find a way to simplify it and still make it effective. The best expression of genius and intelligence is that you can take a very complex thing and make it so simple. The best expression of genius, if you really know what you're doing, you can take a very complex thing and make it very simple. And that's what we should bring to tax. All the great minds in our tax system, we should get to the point where we can make taxation simple enough to be grasped by the average Ghanaian. And to that extent, I agree with some of the things you've said about simplifying it. From where I come in Imani, we believe in a flat tax arrangement. The reason is that it takes out all the convolution and it balances out generally. And if you Google it and read about it, there's a lot of discussion around the flat tax arrangement. But we also need to do something about taxation. And I am more interested in dealing with the expenditure conundrum. We need to break the mold. We need to change the paradigm. We need to rethink the arrangement. And hopefully in the discussion, there will be a chance to discuss some of them. We need to think through how we are going to organize revenue, mobilization, and expenditure at the district level. For me, I think it's crucial. Why? It does a number of things. One, it strips government expenditure below a certain level. In fact, in our laws, these things are there, but we haven't activated them. We are failing totally in collecting property rates in this country. And you have a situation where gutters are not flowing. You go to our so-called A-class areas, airport, residential, and East Legon, and all those other places. You have $1 million mansion, and next to it is a charcoal cellar, and the drain does not flow. All right? These things just don't... Sorry. Already? They just don't sit well. Now, look at the East Legon side of the motorway, where you have Trevi Towers, XGI. There are a number of huge buildings coming on there. You go there, it's not tarred, it's red dirt. And I asked myself, so we expect somebody to collect a certain tax to come and make the roads in that place. Why can't we think through an arrangement where the city authorities calculate exactly how much it will cost to make all those roads over there and split it among those guys and convert it to their tax for the next 5 years? They will make the road. Then the government does not have that burden. It's out of your tax arrangement. Now, I doubt if those people will be paying their property rates anyway. I'm not sure they know where to pay it to. So you have this problem here and then the potential solution here, but we need to think through some of these arrangements so that it does not become a problem for government to take money to go and fix those roads. You can have the people there directly channel the taxes to deal with the things that confront them on a daily basis. There are issues too we need to discuss as a business community with a view of trying to bring some pressure to bear on government. I remember in 2009, Imani wrote a paper about what our oil cannot do for us. And one of the things we said there was setting up what we call the Oil Revenues Commission. I'm saying this because oil now is a major revenue item, we are making a mess of the expenditure in oil. We are wasting it, we are stealing it, and we are totally moving straight towards the curse. I won't talk about the bus branding and things that have happened with our oil money, but we need to go back to that idea. The Oil Revenues Commission is what we call PIAC now. And in the suggestion we made, we said that commission should be set up like a GET fund. All oil revenues are clear. We know where they're coming from. We know how much we get. It goes into an account. That account is dealt with by a commission. There's a whole arrangement of who should belong to the commission, but it's a very good representation. And they determine, based on what they've received in terms of, suggestions and whatever, where the money will go. We suggested all oil money should go only into infrastructure. I don't have time to go into it, but we presently have over $20 billion of infrastructure deficit today, and it grows by $2 billion every year in water, health, education, energy, transport, and telecommunications. So even if we applied all our oil funds to infrastructure, we won't be solving that problem. So there's no point nebulizing the use of that money. PIAC today has no power to ensure certain things are done. So they only have to come at the end and tell us what has gone wrong. We need to think through how we use these revenues going forward. So there are a number of things that we can do to deal with the expenditure side. It clearly does not make sense that we maintain a civil service that does not work for us. Our civil service is a disguised employment agency. Now, it is possible for us to have a good civil service. And the economics of it is this. If you have a good civil service, it will pay for itself. The money we spend on the civil or public services will not be a loss to the economy. Today we see it as, take the money, give it to them, let's buy some peace. But I believe we have the people, and if we can organize them well, they will deliver sufficient value to justify all the money we make on them. Indeed, we could actually make some extra money on them. And I also hope that we will get to the point where we are comfortable with outsourcing as much as possible in our civil and public services. We argued for years on DVLA, and we're told so many things, including how can you allow private people to test cars? There will be accidents all over the place. Well, after so many years, it's been done. That place is one of the shining examples of how a public service can be effective. And the one thing that changed was outsourcing it to private people and supervising them. It's estimated that 40 to 70% of all our ministries, departments, and agencies, especially those who deliver services to citizens, like give you a license, give you a tax clearance certificate, or go for a certain passport or something, can be outsourced. And if it were outsourced, service quality will go up and cost will not necessarily go up because it will pay for itself. So we can get to the point where we sort out the expenditure side by not making it a sink, but hopefully even making it a revenue base because citizens will pay. In short, the point I want to make is this. We need to re-engage with the system. It is our system. If we refuse to engage with it, then people will implement their own agendas, and there's no guarantee that the two agendas, their agenda and what's supposed to be the agenda for all of us, will coincide. I hope in the discussions we'll get into the details of these. Thank you.
Mr. Bentel is one of the people that if you give the whole day, he can talk and still make a lot of sense. One more time, Mr. Kofi Bentel. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll now hear from the IMF resident representative on ways to create fiscal space. Just a bit about him. Before relocating to Ghana in October 2018 as IMF resident representative, was based at the IMF headquarters in Washington, where he oversaw mostly advanced and emerging countries. Prior to joining IMF, he was a senior lecturer at the University of Cape Town in South Africa. He holds a PhD in economics from the University of Montreal in Canada and a master's in finance from the University of Bordeaux. Please help me welcome Dr. Albert Tuna Mama.
Good morning, everyone. Speaking after Kofi will almost make the IMF look too positive on Ghana always. I've been asked to to speak about ways to create fiscal space. I'll try to be short so that we can have time for discussion. But let me first start by providing the context, right? I think that when we talk about fiscal space, especially for countries in sub-Saharan Africa, it goes beyond the electoral cycle, whether we are in an election year. The reality for countries on the continent is one of extremely high infrastructure gaps. The estimate here that Kofi gave was around 20 billion a year for Ghana. But also the context of thinking about fiscal space is one where we have countries that aspire to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. So this is the big picture. This is why we care about improving revenue, about streamlining expenditure. Talking about fiscal space, by way of definition, we think about fiscal space as the extent to which a government is able to raise spending, reduce taxes without affecting or endangering market access, its capacity to raise money from the international capital market, or without affecting debt sustainability. So it's a common misconception to think that fiscal space is just about revenue and how much revenue you can raise. I think that that's the first thing that I want to put out there. Revenue, obviously, it's extremely important, and I'll come back to that, but fiscal space is a bit bigger than that. And in fact, borrowing, or the capacity that the government has to borrow, is also part of fiscal space, right? Borrowing for a government is completely normal. Over-borrowing is what is an issue for a country in general. When you look at the situation for Ghana over the last few years, and when you look at what it is today, if you think about the fact that almost 100% of tax revenue goes between compensation for employees and interest payment. Think about it, 100% of tax revenue, almost 100% goes into paying civil servants and paying back on the debt that the government incurred, right? By this measure of fiscal space, if you were only thinking about tax revenue, there's no space to do anything about development. But when we look at the last few years, I think it's fair to say that we've seen an increase in spending, right? Despite the fact that if we look at just tax revenue, the fiscal space was quite narrow. So that increase in revenue was done in such a way that did not affect market access, right? The government was still able, over the last 3 years, to go to the international capital market. So the question is, how was the government able to increase fiscal space despite the fact that it has a very narrow tax base? The key here, in my view, is that there is a virtuous cycle by which, when you do the proper fiscal consolidation, when you have credible policies, including through the program that we had with Ghana, you are able to carve some space to finance some spending. Don't get me wrong, right? As an IMF, we are unequivocal in the fact that the way to improve fiscal space in Ghana is about improving domestic revenue mobilization, not borrowing. So I would like that to be our basis. And how we do it, we think there are 3 ways to do it, and I will go to the detail as we go into the discussion. First, by improving on tax administration, that's the A. By improving on tax compliance, that's the C. And by improving on tax exemption. And these 3 elements were mentioned one way or the other by the previous panelists. So hopefully the discussion will revolve around domestic revenue mobilization and ways to improve fiscal space. Because we've seen what are the plans that are actually in the making at the Ghana Revenue Authority, we think that there is a really good chance in the medium term to really improve on some of the the lopsided tax revenue that we've seen in the last few years. Ourselves, the IMF, we've been providing a lot of technical assistance to the Ghana Revenue Authority. My fellow panelists went into a lot of details about various options, not innovative options, because we know what are the issues. They revolve around compliance, they revolve around lack of proper means to carry the job of the Revenue Authority, not the right technology, not the right skills. All these issues are known. There's really no need for innovation per se, but there is need for action. There is need to deploy the strategic plan and to improve on domestic revenue for Ghana. So thank you for listening.
One more time, Dr. Albert Tunamama. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, I'd like to remind you that we are live on Joy 99.7 FM. We're also live on JoyNews television. We're also streaming live on myjoyonline.com. Also live on the Facebook page of Daily Graphic Ghana. You can join this conversation using two hashtags. One is Graphic Stanbic Breakfast Series. The other is GBSB Breakfast Meeting on Twitter. So do join us with your thoughts. We'll be getting into the conversation shortly, but my instructions are to take 2 questions before we start. So I'll just take 2 questions. If you have a question, please put up your hand and we'll come to you. There's a gentleman with a hand right here. If you can get him the microphone. One more, and then we'll go into the discussion. There's another hand right on that table. Please introduce yourself and tell us where you're from.
My name is Eric. I'm Gyan-Quansah. I'm with PKF, and I'm a tax consultant. I think that this morning we have met here to discuss something very, very important. I have only 2 issues. One is, how do we enhance revenue mobilization in the country? Okay. You want to pay your income tax, and you have to go through hell to pay. GRA, I think, is doing well, because now we have the ITAPs, and I'm also hoping that very soon limited liability companies will be able to make payment online. The challenge, or the challenges that we've had with these new innovations are that after a while they go down. They go down. And so we have brilliant ideas, but the systems break down along the line.
Right.
The other issue is about how much we spend on things that, for me, are not so important. Let me give just one example. The presidential convoy. Last week, I was from my hometown, and I could count about 10 V8s, an ambulance, and all that. Do you know how much fuel goes into that? And I think that some of these things, we don't need anybody to come and tell us. These are common sense things that you can see.
Very well. I think the
yourself.
question is clear. So let's move to the next person, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have more, but well, maybe.
We'll come back for more.
Hello, thank you. My name is Valentin Mensah.
Right.
And I'm here for a member of Graphic Board. Okay, I'll first of all like to talk about 2 points raised which are key. The first one, innovation, and the second one, the civil service paying for itself. The innovation, as we outlined the various methods, we never thought about how we can bring new taxes or how we can use taxes to enforce or sanction indiscipline. Everybody is talking about road safety. You see the indiscipline on our roads, trucks parking on motorways or highways, and we cannot think about how we can tow the vehicles and get them to pay. When we're talking about towing, we were rather thinking about taxing everybody, the DVLA taxing everybody. But it's not everybody who doesn't maintain his or her vehicle. If you don't maintain your vehicle and you get on our motorway and break down in the middle of the motorway, you need to be made to pay for it. And
so how can we use taxes to sanction indiscipline?
Of course.
Got it.
And then also, there are people parking anywhere. Traffic offenders. Seems like we don't have any highway patrol in the country. The MTTD people are just interested in stopping vehicles and checking licenses. People driving recklessly are not checked. People carrying things on the motorway that can easily fall and endanger other people.
Very well.
Are not also checked.
The point is
so
well made.
we need to look at those to ensure that we raise revenue to pay the civil service and even the police service.
Thank you. We'll take some responses. Abeku, maybe I'll start with you. So the question has to do with how much we spend on necessaries and how do we generate more revenue. It's quite difficult, as people say, to pay income tax in this country. Any response to that?
Hello.
Can we get the technician?
I think it's working now.
It's working, okay.
All right. So thank you very much, Nick. I think this goes back, and the reason why I thought we needed to come up with a certain framework is that we don't want this conversation just to be the usual. We have the conversation, we live here, and nothing is done about it. I'm glad I can see the NCC boss also around. The issue goes back to the framework I shared. If the citizens do not believe that you are using their revenues or their taxes wisely, they would not contribute. I mean, for the big brands, you're always thinking about how would the market respond to the fact that brand A is not tax compliant. But for the usual person in our market, they do not care about tax compliance as such. They do not pay, you caught them, and so what? So if people are not assured that their taxes are going to be put to good use, they would give reasons why they should not pay. So for his example that he gave, if he sees about 20 convoy and his salary is not subject to withholding tax, and we want to take a risk and say that every employee, your employer will pay you, and then you go to the revenue to go and pay your taxes, then we'll see whether or not those of us in the formal sector can actually do worse than those in the informal sector. Two, the systems issue he also raised. I mean, one of the things that breaks my heart is that, as I said, in certain countries, you can go to the revenue and every information that you've submitted over time is there. It is not the case with our institutions here. And since 2010, 2011, thereabout, the GRA has always talked about a system called TRIPS, all right? The question is, where is TRIPS now? Why is it that I cannot just go to the GRA, request for a pullout of the PAY that I've been paying from whenever I started work up to now? Why is that information not there? So if the systems are not in place to make it convenient for people to comply, and if people also think that, look, we have a social contract, but then you, government, has breached that contract, then the person also says this is grounds for me to also breach the contract. Thank you.
So there's a question about how can we use taxes to sanction indiscipline. I believe that there are laws, and the issue really has to do with enforcement of those laws. Am I right?
Yeah, it has to do with enforcement. But again, it's work. Enforcement is work. And we have to admit that we have a certain national psyche. And from the bottom to the top, whenever we have a problem, the first thing that comes to us is how we can benefit from the problem. That's what led to the toll levy issue. Whenever you have a problem in the street, so what you're talking about, I call it monetizing indiscipline. All right? Now, but monetizing indiscipline must be a state construct, something to bring money into the system, and like you said, fund the civil service. But the guy is thinking about using that problem to enrich himself. All right? So we need to understand this is us, all right, from the bottom to the top. Now, when the other gentleman talked about the 20 convoy vehicle and all those things, you can drop them in these conversations here and there. Nothing will change because there is no pressure in an organized way to make it change, which is why I'm saying you need to get to the point where now those of us sitting here can constitute a potent enough force to give the politician a healthy fear. So if that is seen, there will be some sort of consequence. We have to think through it and get to the point. But the private sector has the brain power to make it happen. Again, if you think about this thing about the GRA TRIPS systems that don't work. Look, today in the US, the biggest IT contract is coming out of the Defense Department. And they are going to buy cloud computing from a private company. And the deal is between Microsoft, which does software, and Amazon, which sells everything. The point I want to make is this. The most sensitive war machine on this planet is looking to outsource its data to somebody who does nothing about war. And we sit here and we want GRA to manage a nationwide network, which is super complex. Why? Because that thing is going to cost some $40 million and somebody that wants it. We sitting here should say, GRA, you have no inherent power or, you don't have the wherewithal. So outsource it. Make sure it works. Now give that person you are going to pay clear things to achieve. It must be up 99% of the time, ABC. There will be 20 companies, and I know Ghanaian companies that can do this work. Okay, that itself is creating employment, etc., and all of us will benefit from it. But we allow GRA to do that. Okay, and clearly the IT guy in your office, chances are, maybe sharper and smarter than maybe the guy who is working the GRA system. By the way, they are very fantastic guys in GRA. But their core business is not running a nationwide IT system. So again, governments will do their best. And I think when Mr. Tekwe was running the system, he will say, hey, private sector, it will be too expensive. He will find a way to build it within the government system. That is just their national ethos. They try to build everything in-house. It hasn't worked, but they don't change. It would take Mr. Laye, Mr. Andani, a couple people sitting and saying, you will not do this. And well, I don't want to talk too much, but I just want to give examples of other places where this is the only thing that has worked. Private sector activism is the only thing that has forced politicians to change and move in a certain direction. I think I'll pause here.
Let me come to Dr. Albert Tunamama. So you've been monitoring emerging and developed economies at the IMF for some time. What can you tell us, and what are the best practices that we can learn from?
I think that, unlike Kofi, it's not clear that outsourcing everything will necessarily solve the problem. When you look at tax authorities around the world today, these are institutions that are, young, bright people, tech savvy, that use artificial intelligence to run their tax systems. I'm not sure that by outsourcing you necessarily solve the problem that you have a revenue authority that is not ready for the challenges of today. You still need to solve that. My sense is that the biggest work should be to improve tax administration, tax service, the service that the taxpayer as a client is encountering whenever he wants to pay his taxes. At the moment, as was mentioned earlier, it's extremely difficult, even if you want to be compliant voluntarily, it's extremely difficult to go and pay your taxes. The incentive is such that if you register a company, you are pushed out of the Ghana Revenue Authority because of the type of challenges that you'll face when you go there. So in my sense, the priority should be to try by all means to make the system that you have work. You mentioned TRIPS and some other technologies. What is happening sometimes is that you have the best IT systems, but people, including at GRA, are still running things manually, right? So that's the type of challenges that you face. It doesn't mean that you need to throw completely the institution and give it to a private contractor, which, by the way, in some cases, and I know for some of the IT systems that GRA is using, they don't even have access to the data of these private contractors. How can you run policies if you don't know exactly, or you need to go to a private contractor, right? You don't have access to its database to know exactly how much you're making on customs, what are the characteristics of the taxpayers. You cannot really target any sort of policies if you don't have access to this. So I will try to, okay. I think that, outsourcing everything may face some challenge.
Let's move on to some other aspect of expenditure. How we deliver public investment in a way that ensures that we get the desired returns. And Mr. Bento, you know that in 2016, we inaugurated the Commander Sugar Factory because we spent about $200 million importing sugar annually. What happened was that after 2 years, the sugar factory still remained closed because we couldn't find sugar cane. How do we deliver public investment in a way that ensures that we get the maximum returns?
President Obama said something. He said, don't do silly stuff. Sometimes it's possible to know what you're going to do is silly stuff. All right? And in the case of Commander, and I'm using that because you raised it, sometimes, again, politicians have an agenda because it does something for them in terms of their politicking. And if we allow them, they will do what they want to do, even when it's clearly silly stuff. Why was Commander silly stuff? I sat on air publicly more than a year before Commander Sugar Factory came on and said it will produce more propaganda than sugar. Because Imani had done the work and we had proven that after spending all the money there, we didn't have what it takes to feed the factory. And if we imported the sugar output will cost 3 times what was on the market. We did this 2 years before the time and published the information.
But shouldn't we have done our due diligence? Shouldn't we have done feasibility studies?
Which is why I said don't do silly stuff. We didn't do the due diligence, and when we did the due diligence free of charge and published it, our governments refused to listen to it. And we spent $36 million. It cannot yield anything. That is not the way to go. Okay, we can argue about whatever. It's not, the way not to go is when it's clearly not a good idea going into it. Look, there are things we can do. Again, in short times like this, you can't express everything. But I do have the firm belief that, one, back to the principles, if we, the private sector, say, look, this is what is important to us. The Kaswa traffic is too much. Cape Coast is where all our schools are. All right? This problem is, and then you focus a bit of, attention on that. I gave the example of the buildings, high rises coming off the motorway. You have a situation, those are multi-million-dollar investments, okay? We should have a sense of making economic sense of them, okay? Use that to make the roads in that whole area and bill it to the people and give it to them as their tax paid, for the next 5 years or so. I believe there are ways we can think through and resolve our issues. But clearly we should start from not doing the things which are clearly not going to yield the necessary results. And again, it comes from a certain amount of pressure from the public so that the politicians will just step back, even if that thing may be politically expedient.
Let me come to Abeku. So, Abeku, what I want to find out from you is how the multiplicity of IDs is affecting our tax mobilization efforts. So 60 years after independence, we are still struggling with national IDs. The Vice President says we'll get about 16 million taxpayers by the end of this year. National Identification Authority has registered about 8.7 million as of February 11th this year. How crucial is getting one ID to enhancing our revenue mobilization efforts?
Nick, for me, before you can get somebody to discharge your tax obligation, you should be able to identify them.
Right.
Now, one of the interesting things is a simple Google will show you that depending on who you talk to, the number of registered taxpayers, and when we see somebody does not pay tax, we're essentially talking about direct tax because we all pay a form of consumption tax or the other. Now, depending on who you talk to, we say we have 1.5 million, sometimes 2 million, sometimes 2.5. So the question I sometimes even ask is that, are the number of taxpayers dying and dying and dying? Because usually it was 2.5, it dropped and came down. Now, if you don't have a single reliable database to pursue and ensure that people are complying with their tax obligations, then you definitely have a challenge with ensuring that they comply. And if you do not link the benefits that people get from paying taxes to discharging their tax obligations, then we will have the challenge that we keep having.
Let me go to Albert. So, Albert, I want you to help me out with this. How is the creation of new bureaucracies affecting government spending? We seem to be creating every specialized office for every new government project. So we have one district, one factory, we create a special office for, we have one Zongo, one development, or whatever it is, we create a Zongo development ministry. How is that affecting our expenditure? And isn't it superfluous anyway? Isn't it superfluous? Is it unnecessary that we create new bureaucracies for every government project?
It's certainly a challenge, but I think that irrespective of the governance system that you have, it needs to be accountable. It needs to be results-driven to be able to make that judgment at the end of the day, right? I think that the link between the outcome and the means to use to get there is ultimately what justify or not the route that you're taking to get there. And it's not clear to me
does the expenditure justify the returns we are getting? Because obviously, if you're creating a new office, you're spending on employee remuneration, you're spending on infrastructure, you're spending on equipment.
You still need to run the system. You still need bodies to be able to run whatever project you have. Right? I think the ultimate, the yardstick towards which you measure this is how much return you are able to make. If you talk about one district, one factory, time will tell us whether the way that has been done is the way to go in terms of expanding non-oil growth in this country, instead in terms of expanding manufacturing. So the next few years will tell us whether we have a sustainable base of manufacturing to justify the way we actually went about it.
But the point is, so you have a Ministry of Trade that could have taken care of that. You don't need a specialized office. Is it a good argument?
It's unclear to me that you won't need a specialized office, right? I think that in certain line of business, you probably need some experts. So, you know, I'll still come back on the outcome, right?
Okay.
I still come back on the outcome. But it's clear that when you already have, and I alluded to that, a system where compensation of employees eats up more than 70% of your revenue, you know, you would like to think that you need to find ways within the current envelope to do or deliver all the, you know, the objectives that you have instead of expanding it further, right?
Kofi Bento, the same question to you.
Look, we have 110 ministers. We have 275, members of parliament. We have district chief executives. We even have assemblymen. All of these people purport to be running our lives. I have no doubt that some of the people sitting here have no interface with these people. There are people in this room who generate their own electricity, produce their own water, and even make the roads to their houses. My point is our government is way too large, way too expensive, and way too unproductive. And again, it will not change unless we start pushing down on it. So the answer is in the question. We have ministries. I hold the view that we don't need more than 50 ministries, 50 ministers, and we don't need more than 10 ministries. If we have time, I'll explain it. It is about what you do. It is not about building all those things around them to make them happen. And then there are key things. There are things that when you touch, many things will be affected. One of those key things is the national ID thing, all right? And we are not giving it the kind of attention we need to give it. It's sad that we are having to argue right now about the EC spending $100 million to produce voter ID cards when the national ID system has more than the information we need for that. Now, we all here should support that and infuse it with more relevance. You should be requiring the national ID system for the work that you do. So the basic point is this: government can be shrunk and still be more productive. We don't need to have 110 ministers. We raised those issues. The president said, well, the end will justify the means. 3 years down the line, we don't think that has happened. We need to support some of the things that are game changers, like the national ID thing, and get to the point where the 8 different ID cards we have will be fused into one. It will help the tax tracking arrangement. If you're using it across, places, the triangulation can help so that you can be identified, and things like the GPS coding, the addressing system. Those things are game changers. It is not about creating new ministries, new ministers, and all those things, which are very expensive.
Abeku, so Bento in his earlier presentation talked about property taxes and how it can generate a huge chunk of revenue for us. In this country, we don't seem to be collecting property taxes. And even when we do, the rates are so low. So I have a friend who has a 3-bedroom house at Spintex. Last year, he paid about 120 cedis for the whole year. You have all kinds of fancy properties around town that we could be taxing them for property rates. How do we fix that? Of course, we know that it is the job of the district assemblies and the MMDAs to be able to collect them. On what is the basis of the valuation of these properties? And how can we fix that?
All right. So, and I'm happy you've quickly ended that, because the general perception has always been as if we had anything in our law called property tax. We don't. Our tax laws, or the laws administered by the GRA, doesn't have anything called property tax. Property rates could be the best proxy in this particular instance, and it is what the MMDAs actually, as you rightly say, are doing. But the challenge with the MMDAs are that, one, do they even have the capacity to do the right valuation of those properties? And even if they are using a certain reference or a certain benchmark, how many years ago was that benchmark developed?
But by law, and according to Section 3 of the GRA Act, it is supposed to be the duty of the GRA that is supposed to advise them or assist them in doing that valuation.
Yes, so that's right. But even the law we just even talked about, there are various sections the GRA has not even done with respect to the laws that it has jurisdiction over. How then do you go advising MMDA as to what to do when in your own laws there are 1,001 things you haven't?
So how do we fix that? Do we get land valuers to value properties?
Oh yes. So I think, how do we fix that? We need to start, in my humble opinion, by revaluing or having a credible database or a credible benchmark of the property values, and then educate people on how those values are so determined and how they could conveniently pay those taxes. And then also ensure that people see the reason why the taxes they are paying are translating into their lives. So, for example, if I'm in a particular locality and I've always complained about the roads to my house, and I am paying property rates, and I don't see anything being done with regard to fixing those roads, then obviously you get a situation whereby, just as we had on the luxury vehicle stuff, where you have a lot of revolts, and government must listen to the people at the end of the day. So fix the people's issues, have a credible database of values and how people can easily determine those values, and then make it convenient for people to pay, and also finally ensure that as they pay, they have value for the payment that they are making.
Right. So earlier you made a point about tax exemptions, and I want to stay with you on that. Are we getting enough return for the tax exemptions we give corporations, and how can we be creative? So if you're giving AngloGold X, tax exemption, is it possible to ask them to fix the Obuasi Road, for example?
Well, you could ask them to fix the Obuasi Road, but then the challenge around exemption is that it goes through a lot of procedures. Okay, so on the 7th of December, you and I are probably going to stand and then vote again, and entrust our destinies into the hands of some members of parliament for a number of years to come. Now, certain arguments have been given, and one of the things that you'll find in the exemption bill of 2019 is that exemptions constitute about 12.5% of our tax collections. Now, provided this is true, and provided that those you and I have elected are required and to ensure that before they approve any tax exemption, they look at the value. Actually, the laws of the land require that you cannot just go to Parliament and say, exempt me from product A or product B. You need to submit to Parliament the benefits arising from those exemptions. So the question is, are our parliamentarians doing the right job? My default answer will be yes, until I have reasons to doubt. So are there benefits in the exemptions? I would say so, because that is why parliaments have been exempting those policies. But then the issue is that over time, and as proposed to IMF in one of the Article 4 documents that they issued, they clearly said we needed a bill to be passed into an act so that you and I can clearly see the procedures in getting an exemption.
Right.
And one of the interesting things in that exemption bill, as we saw it in last year, March, is that if that exemption bill is passed in its current form, all exemptions in various laws would no longer be respected, except for those in the Income Tax Act and in the VAT Act. So in brief response to your question, I would assume that our parliamentarians are doing the right jobs. They are checking to ensure that there is value for money in those projects they are granting exemptions for. And to the extent that we have doubt around it, what Parliament needs to do as a matter of urgency is to pass that exemption bill that has been lying with them since March of 2019.
Right. So I don't want to get accused of asking all the questions, so I'm going to open the floor. If you have a question, please put up your hand. I see some hands up already. So there's a gentleman in spectacles, there. Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. It looks like running through all the submissions, you can see clearly we endorse revenue mobilization. One bit that I want to touch on is the informal sector. Now, this informal sector basically, will rely on the financial sector, which we've done a cleanup. So you ask yourself, have we assessed the operational level of this informal sector for us to, go and, introduce taxes, or possibly, after the cleanup, how are they faring, on the market before we can start thinking about introducing taxes there, not to crash them or maybe lay them off the market. Now, another one is how we look at, the revenue expenditure conundrum that we're talking about here. That's the main vein that we are sitting here. Now, if you look at the budget that was read, 2020, you clearly see that some of the deficit that government subsidies, grant to other government subsidies, and you look at the grant that is coming into the country, which is about 1.2 billion, grant to other government subsidies is about 15 billion. When you add other expenditure, which we don't know what goes into the other expenditure, you'll fill in this 18 billion gap.
So the question?
So the question is, why do we think, that 18 billion are not a way of ensuring that we create an economic activity for which, all the funds that will run through this economic activity will end up in people's pocket?
Right. So Mr. Tepe is here, the former finance minister. Mr. Tepe, can we get a microphone to him, please?
Yeah, thank you very much. Mine will be by way of quick intervention in 3 areas. I'd like to clarify that all the fiscal systems are actually outsourced. So TRIPS is outsourced, GCNet is outsourced, and when you go into other areas, single window and others, they are outsourced. Customs, GRA has a GCMS, which is more of a coordinating system. So we do practice, outsourcing to a very large extent. In fact, even when you get to the systems underlying GIFMIS on the expenditure side, payroll and others, they are actually outsourced. So sometimes the efficiency also has to do, with private sector, and the problems you have is with legacy systems and how often, they are, upgraded. Let me also do a quick correction. The deficit at the end of 2016 is 6.3 on a new basis. It's not 8.7. And you can refer to the budget, appendices, and you get that. But my main point is that, first, on revenues, we do have tax handles. And rightly so, they are VAT, income tax, more of the corporate income tax, and customs, because we are a developing country. So tariffs are a major source of revenue. The issue is to leave these taxes to be stable, to be stabilized. Tax administration is not the only issue. And so tax structure, tax policy, and leaving these tax handlers, too, because we make changes, after 5 years, we come back and correct them. And I'm talking about somebody who's been involved in taxes since the Washington Consensus days, since PSAP. I can assure you that we are going to come back and do many of the corrections on VAT and corporate income tax. Now, because once you are not getting the revenue, once your revenue is flat, you have to come back, and you are going to come back to the original. Input tax credit is key to VAT. When you deny it, you encourage evasion and avoidance, and it's as simple as that. Expenditures, I think the private sector has a role. The point is, what is accrual? And when should accrual feature as part of the deficit or not? This is a role for the Institute of Chartered Accountants under IFSAS. And we have said that since 2015, that the Institute of Chartered Accountants should give us those standards. It's a role for the multilaterals. Is amortization part of arrears or not? The government financial statistics or the IMF is clear on the issue. Why it should be a controversial issue in Ghana is anybody's guess. And so I think that part of what we need as a country that has come this far is for us to leave our middle-income country status, leave some of the confusion of a developing country behind us, and allow regulatory agencies like the Institute and the rest to determine, what is accounting standard. Because it's public sector, I'm speaking as an accountant. And that is why I think that is very important and crucial. Otherwise, if you have the standard and you have the rule, government agencies the largest number of accountants qualified are in the controller in the country. And when you take GRA, controller, and audit service and whatever, the largest concentration of qualified accountants are in the public service. And I think once you give them the rules, they can apply it. And it will be difficult for interference and others. My final point, and I'm not on the panel, Ghana is going through a major transition from HIPIC, fiscal space. That was where our first fiscal space came from. HIPIC, when the debt was forgiven. We failed it. Just when we were getting into debt distress, we became middle income on the back of rebasing and on the back of oil. In our thinking as a nation, and Mr. Benson mentioned it, we passed the Petroleum Revenue Management Act. We said we would allocate, let's allocate 70%. I'm not saying it's easy, I've been Minister of Finance, but let's allocate the 70% of the 70% for ABFA for infrastructure before we even think about 100%. Because that's what the law says. And we need to build infrastructure as a middle-income, country. And so if we can do that, and when we say that we are setting up, and this is another issue for the multilaterals, when we say that in our wisdom, we are setting up a sinking fund to pay down debt, and we set up the sinking fund and use 550 million Ghana cedis, US dollars, of our own oil revenue to pay the first sovereign bond, which was 750. 550 million of that bond was from our revenue under the sinking fund. I think this is a better balanced, better fiscal treatment than forcing the country to use the sinking fund to reduce the deficit. Because if you force the country to use the sinking fund to reduce the deficit is nothing but consumption. And one day this country will be accused, like our counterparts in Nigeria, Angola, and the rest, of using our oil revenue for consumption. We also said we would allocate part of it to the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund, and I'm glad that that debate is coming back and it's in the debate. So we do have the mechanisms, and I think we should be assisted, and we need the support of the multilaterals. We are a middle-income country. We are losing grants. We are losing concessional financing. And the consistency is not just from, CA Ghana, but we want the government fiscal statistics and others to be applied evenly. What is it, my final point, what is it that makes single spine an exceptional expenditure? And I'm being technical here, accountants, you know it. What is it that makes single spine an exceptional expenditure and bailout costs not an expenditure, an exceptional expenditure, corrected now for four years? What is that makes the difference? When from HIPIC revenues through divestiture, we have had a consistent way of handling this in our fiscal. And under the same fund program, we allowed different treatments. And for things that were prior actions, we had to be reversed. I think these things don't help our countries, to move forward. And you can see that most of what I've said, is highly technical. Excuse me, because I don't want to confuse it, with the politics of the day. So I'm addressing this, to our technical people, the private sector, the accountants and others in both public and private. The Institute of Chartered Accountants also need to step in as regulators and give us the rules and the regulations. And whether, and in that case, either the fiscal management, the Public Financial Management Act or the Budget Responsibility Act, whichever one you choose, they all have fiscal rules, they will apply. And they will apply well for the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tepe. And I'm going to come back to the audience, but Mr. Tepe has touched on a number of issues. Mr. Benso, I saw you shaking your head to some and nodding your head to some.
Hello. Okay, let me use this. Yeah. Hello. Okay, so yes, it's interesting. And I do think that maybe one of the key things we should take out of this meeting is what should we do with oil revenues? It's a major issue. It's a major revenue item. And honestly, it has happened in our time. We are the people whose laps the management of this thing has fallen on. It is our memory that posterity will judge. Our kids will cast a judgment on us depending on how we manage this. And here's the problem. So far, we've done the worst job possible. I remember when the oil was coming on stream and all the meetings had, people flew to Norway learning what's the best to do. We passed the PRMA and we said 70% into infrastructure. We have managed to make a total mess of it. Okay, and I don't want to go into the history of everything, but here's the thing. One, we should acknowledge that even if we don't do anything with the oil money, Mr. Tepe says, let's agree on the 70%. I don't object. Let some of it go to some other places. But even if we put 100% of the oil money in infrastructure, two things. One, it will not be enough. And two, it will be the best use of that money. Because that has the potential of affecting you personally and your business. We are talking about water, health, transport, telecommunication, roads. We are talking about, energy. We are talking about education. Okay, that will have an effect on you. What we are dealing with right now is a situation where the law has loose ends. And at every loose end, we are stretching it. So what is happening is that we are pulling all that money and basically spending it. We have little to show for oil revenues. Okay. So we need to contemplate very seriously what we are going to do to tie down and save ourselves from ourselves as a country and make sure we have something to show for oil. Because it's the kind of blessing that God just dropped on us and says, let's see what you will do with it. And I'm saying the issues are clear. So far, we've done the worst job possible. We need to take another look at that one.
I'll take it that that's the verdict of Mr. Kofi Bento. So let's take some more questions. There's a hand right here. If we can get the microphone to him. Yes, I'll come back to you, Doc. Yes, there's a lady. I've seen you. I'll come back to you.
Thank you. My name is Alex Ampavin, Oxfam, Ghana. One quick question I would like to ask my audience is that I've been looking for some creative ways of increasing domestic revenue, and I've been looking for administration and all other factors. How does the GRA senior level composition with political influence affect revenue mobilization? We've seen the work of the Auditor General recently, and the political protection or the legal protection he enjoys actually give him the room to do some of the things he wants to do. We can't say the same thing with the Commissioner General of the GRA. How does the political influence affect the job they do and subsequently revenue mobilization? Can we, or is there any opportunity for us to look for the same safeguarding for the Commissioner General? And question number 2, we've been struggling with DRM, especially on the informal sector. Depending on what paper you read, some are saying 70%, some are saying 80%, some are saying 60%.